Welcome to Catholic Feedback. I'm your host, Keith Nestor. On this podcast, we connect the eternal truths of the Catholic faith with everyday life. Send in your questions and comments to feedback@catholicfeedback.com. This podcast is brought to you by Down to Earth Ministry, a ministry of stewardship, a mission of faith, and by the generous support of our patrons. For more information, please visit downtoearthministry.org. That's down, the number 2, earthministry.org. Let's get to it. What's up, everybody? How you doing? My name is Keith Nestor, and I'm coming to you today live from St. John Cantius Church in Chicago with my good buddy Austin Suggs from Gospel Simplicity, and we are so excited to be here. Austin, how's it going, man?
Oh, it's going well. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Glad we could meet in person.
Absolutely.
What a day.
And, you know, there were all these rumors floating around that you were going to tower over me in height because, you know, people like to tease me about being short. When I got here, you know, we're like kind of on the same level, which is cool.
Just some slander from the other Keith.
Yeah.
We'll let you
these Canadians
put those things together.
Anyway. So Stella and I and our son Drew, we're making a cross-country Rosary Crew trip. We're heading all the way over to the coast, and I thought I've got to stop in to see you in Chicago because the last time we talked was on, we were just talking, that was months ago.
Yeah, it's like last fall.
Yeah, so real quick, tell everybody kind of who you are and why they should know about Gospel Simplicity and what you're up to and how you wound up here in this church.
All right. I think that was about 3 questions. I'm not sure how compelling my answer will be for why they should know about who I am, but I can tell them who I am. So I'm Austin. I have a YouTube channel and podcast called Gospel Simplicity, where I try to help bring simplicity to theological complexity and have conversations with people from across the Christian tradition and see what unites and divides us. And yeah, that's kind of what we do there. I hope you enjoy that. If you're into those kind of things, if you like Keith's channel, you might enjoy mine. But yeah, you can check those things out. How did I end up here at St. John Cantius? I'm a student at Moody Bible Institute, which is just down the street from here in Chicago. So literally I got here by walking. That's how I got here.
So for people who don't know what Moody Bible Institute is.
Yes, where Bible is our middle name. So I hear.
That's pretty hardcore right there.
Right? Yeah. No. So Moody Bible Institute is a school. It's a college here in Chicago, and we have a myriad of programs, but they're all kind of focused on people wanting to go into ministry. So no matter what your major is, you're going to take like 30 credit hours of Bible and theology classes. I happen to be a theology major, so it's a lot more than that, but it's a school that was founded by the famous evangelist D.L. Moody back in 1886, and it's still here today.
So where would you say Moody Bible Institute is on the theological spectrum? Is it a fundamentalist school? Is it an evangelical school? Is it Baptist, Pentecostal? Like, do they have a niche, or is it sort of broad?
Yeah, it's sort of broad. So I would describe it as broadly evangelical.
Okay.
It does have a history as what's known as like dispensationalism. I wouldn't call myself a dispensationalist. It gets complicated, but that's something people might associate it with. And then it's not associated with any particular denomination, but it's interdenominational in that way. But all the professors do have to sign a certain doctrinal statement, which includes like the Chicago Statement on Inerrancy. So it's definitely more conservative theologically speaking.
Okay. So conservative Protestantism, and yet you've become sort of a favorite of a lot of Catholics who like to watch your content. Do you have any idea why that is?
No idea. I don't know why anyone watches it. No. It's been quite a funny little journey. So I started my YouTube channel a while ago. It was over like 2 years ago, and I made videos for like a year and a half and no one watched any of them. And slowly the channel started growing. One day I made a video about my experience going to a Catholic Bible study. Didn't really think anything of it at the time. In fact, I made the video like a year after going to this Bible study. I was just kind of thinking about different things. I was like, hey, I'll make a video about this. And that kind of slowly began taking off, and people kept telling me, oh, that's cool that you went to this Bible study, but you really need to go to a mass. And I was like, okay, sounds logical. Like, I like learning about things. Let's go to a mass. So this is actually where I went for my first mass, which is right down the street, which if you've seen this church, it was quite the treat to get to do that. And I made a video about that. That really blew up. And then before I knew it, I was getting invited on Catholic podcasts like yours. You were the first person I think I interviewed on my channel. We kind of did back and forth that day. And it forced me to start asking questions about things that I'd never asked questions about. And I had to start thinking through these things and got to do it. I had the privilege of getting to think through these things, not only publicly, but with some of the smartest people I could find, and just saying like, hey, I have these questions. You want to come on my channel and help me answer these questions? So that's a bit of what my journey has been. And I know a lot of people who watch my channel kind of describe it as, it looks, for them, it's like watching their own experience of looking into the Catholic or Orthodox Church kind of in slow motion, and they're getting to see it. And so some people enjoy that kind of thing, but that's kind of how I got to where I am.
Okay. So before I ask you about your faith in that journey, I want to just tell everybody a little bit about what's been going on in your life, because you've had a big year.
Yeah, I have. Yeah. So the most exciting thing, in my mind at least, is that I got engaged this year. So in March, I got engaged to my fiance, Eliza, my better half. We've been together for about 3.5 years now. So that was really exciting. We'll be getting married next summer. And else pales in comparison to that. But what else is going on? I'm taking Latin this summer. I'm still a student finishing up my junior year. By tomorrow, I should be about done my finals. So yeah, other things in my life. People have started watching my videos, and that's still a strange phenomenon I'm getting used to, because it still feels like I just talked to a camera in my dorm room.
So you become well known in the Catholic YouTube world for your associations with St. John Cantius Church. We came here today, and when we walked in, the priest here, Father Joshua, turned over the tour to Austin. So Austin, give us the tour. So now you're giving tours at St. John Cantius Church. You're taking Latin this summer. I mean, dude, like, what's the next? Are you going to start wearing a hair shirt and fasting every other day? I mean, because you're practically there, dude. I'm just saying,
Yeah, people like to joke with me that I go to more masses than most Catholics. Yeah, I think as far as the hair shirt, I think the next thing most people would like to see is me cut my hair. I think I get more comments on that than just about anything. Good luck with that one. But no, what's next? I'm still just trying to sort through these questions and have more clarity on these issues. The really interesting thing, and we'll get into this, I guess, but it's a blessing getting to talk to all of these really brilliant people. But I'm also talking to brilliant people from multiple sides of this,
which is great.
Yeah, which is great. And I think it's the best way to investigate these things is compare not the worst of, say, Protestantism with the best of Catholicism, or vice versa.
Yeah.
But to really see what's the best of these traditions. The difficult thing is when you get to sit down and talk with these brilliant people, you sit down with someone I had Dr. David Bradshaw, this Orthodox writer, and it's wow, everything you're saying sounds really, really intelligent. And then the next week you have Father Gregory Pine on, and you're you're blowing my mind. I understood half of what you said, but it sounded really smart. And so, you're filtering through all these things. So sometimes more information, it slowly helps build clarity, but I think it also makes it a little more difficult in some ways, because it's not super simple in that way.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think a lot of times, no matter what faith tradition you find yourself in, you can think that, it's very obvious why you should be whatever you are.
Sure.
So for Protestants, a lot of them are well, duh, of course, Protestantism, not Catholicism, not Orthodoxy, because, we have the Bible, and everything that we think is in the Bible is there. And then you have Catholics that are just dude, why not Catholicism? It's black and white. It's super obvious. So a lot of people do that, I think.
Yeah.
So what you're in the middle of with this, it kind of reminds me of what happened when Lee Strobel, remember, I'm sure you know who he is. He's from Chicago. He's a guy who set out to, as a journalist, disprove Christianity. And he wound up becoming a Christian in the process because he was interviewing all these different experts about different areas of faith and of history and scholarship and things like that. You're kind of on that same journey. But the question I have for you is, what has this been like? And I don't know, can you guys hear the organ? This is awesome, by the way. If you can't
hear background music.
If you can't hear, there's there's a giant organ in the next rooms. We're literally in the side chapel here at Cantius, and they're practicing the organ. So I hope you guys can hear that. It's super cool. But anyway, what's this been like for you in terms of your faith? Has this helped you grow, or is this made you go into a tailspin?
Yeah, maybe it depends on the day you ask me.
Yeah.
But I think for the most part, I think it's been something that's built my faith, because I think anytime you're forced out of your comfort zone and you want to keep pursuing God. So, you kind of have those two options, right? You're forced out of your comfort zone. You can say, like, you can throw your hands up, like, I don't like this, I'm backing out. But I think this experience has been uncomfortable in many ways, for sure, because it's a lot more comfortable just feeling like you know all the right answers. And I won't lie, there's definitely days where I go like, why did I ever start asking these questions? Like, this was so much simpler. But I think that wrestling and those nights where you're like, am I wrong? And you're really asking these difficult questions, and you're spending that time in prayer. I think that forces you to grow through that discomfort.
Yeah.
But it's like going to the gym. It doesn't necessarily feel good in the moment, but you're hoping down the line this pays off. So we'll see.
So what's changed for you? Have you had things in your own theological perspective, or maybe opinions or ideas? Has anything changed for you in all this?
Yeah, for sure. So one thing, like, tangibly, right? So here on my wrist, like the Jesus prayer from the Orthodox life. It's amazing that people like pick up on that in my videos, that they see that. But that's been one thing, like my prayer life has changed, I think, and utilizing more like written prayers. That's not something I ever grew up with in like kind of a more dynamic evangelical environment. I come to Mass here a fair amount and just really enjoy that. Something that I kind of picked up from that too was like a lot of times before I'll sit down to do my Bible reading the creed beforehand, recognizing like this is the context in which I'm reading this, which I kind of, picked up through just reading the missal here and whatnot. I think probably one of the most significant things that's changed would be my view on the Eucharist. I grew up not really thinking anything of it. So I would say, it's a time of remembering Christ kind of in his absence, almost like a funeral service, right? I've heard people compare it to. And that's really it. We do this in remembrance of him, but there's not that aspect of like where Paul talks about, the chapter before he talks about remembrance, he talks about like a participation in his blood and in his flesh. And then one of my more popular videos it's funny because it's me like struggling for 40 minutes. I didn't think anyone was going to watch it. It's me trying to wrestle through John 6. I was doing a series through the book of John and really going through that and trying to weigh the arguments. And I'd say even since I made that video, in that video I kind of ended with like, I think there's some type of real presence here, but man, like I'm not really sure. I would assert that more strongly, I think now. I do think there's maybe different ways of formulating that, even between, say, like how you've got kind of the Aristotelian definition of transubstantiation in the Catholic Church. You're not going to have it laid out quite as neatly in the Orthodox Church. Then you have Luther talking about the real presence, but the bread remaining. So I wouldn't say I've like figured out all those questions, but certainly a much higher view of the Eucharist would be one big change.
Okay. When you've thought about it, when you go to Mass, how does it make you feel when you see everybody go up for Mass, but you as a Protestant, you can't receive? Like, because I remember what that was like for me. I was starting to have some of those moments where I felt like, okay, I'm starting to come to a different understanding of the Eucharist.
Sure.
But feeling that just, I don't know, it was hard sometimes. Do you have like a desire to receive the Eucharist in the Catholic Church? So is that something that when that happens, are you wishing you could go, or?
Yeah, I think for sure. I think, at a very basic social level, anytime you see people participating in something that you can't participate in, there's that sense of being left out. But then there is that kind of deeper aspect of like, man, like I do believe that in the Eucharist, like we really receive Christ, even if I can't explain exactly how all that works. And to not get to do that is, it's not the best feeling. I understand the reasons behind it.
Yeah, you're not like offended. Obviously, you're
right.
not.
I never go up and try to break the rules or anything.
They wouldn't let you. Like some people could get away with it because they would, but they'd be like, "Hey, see that guy right there? We know him. Don't let him."
Yeah, they got me like a picture up on their wall, like watch out for this guy. No. But yeah, so I'd say there's an element of that, like maybe a longing, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
But usually if I'm coming here, it's like the 5:00 service, and it's not like this is the only church I go to or something like that.
So what draws you back
to here specifically?
Yeah, because you came in to make your video, you got the tour of the church, you learned about it, you've experienced it.
Right.
But that wasn't the end for you. You continue to come here. What's behind that?
Yeah. Well, I think a short answer would be if people could see the other side of this camera, it would happen pretty quickly. Why would you come back? It's, on one level, it's a beautiful space.
Yeah.
And I enjoy coming here. They pray the liturgy of the hours every day. And I like stopping in for that, or just in between. The church is open all day, just as a place for prayer. I mean, you can come in and hear the organ playing and sit and, just the space itself is very conducive to prayer. But besides that, I think to investigate these things in a healthy way, it's got to be more than a journey of the mind, at least for me, right? Because, and I see this sometimes with converts, like they come into church, it seems, and then all they want to do, like they stay in this place of always wanting to argue for the faith. Like that's where they're at. It's like this intellectual thing, which I get, and some people are good at that and they've got a gift for it. But for me, like if I was ever to take that step, I would want it to be more than like, I found the right answer to these questions, and now I'm just going to give everyone out, like, I'm going to argue, and this is just a matter of the mind. But for me, like, if to really understand it, I feel like I'd have to like enter into the life of it and see what it's really like. And so that's one reason I enjoy coming here. I've also just built a great relationship with Father Joshua. I mean, right before we were doing this,
he just came back in here, check on us. Yeah.
And Father Joshua and I were out for coffee before this morning, and so I've gotten a lot of the brothers and the other priests.
Don't tell him I got his name wrong, okay? I
won't tell him.
Okay.
Yeah, but so that's one of the reasons I come back. Also, something that's been interesting is as I've been interested in these things and asking these questions, and I don't do it privately, it's public domain. People at Moody, which like isn't known for being very ecumenical, right? But there's been a lot of students, especially theology majors, who are kind of more into questions like this, who have kind of come to me and said like, hey, I'm kind of asking similar questions, or I started watching your videos and it's changing how I think, and they want to start asking similar questions. And I've developed a friend group of a couple of theology majors where we meet a couple times a week and we talk about these questions. And I've brought a lot of them here because they're like, man, I'm wondering about these things. I'm like, well, if you really want to try to learn about this, like, let's go to a mass and I'll show you around. I'll take you through the building. I'll introduce you to Father Joshua. So that's been part of it too.
Wow. That's been incredible. I mean, I listen to you and it's hard for me not to look at where you are and remember where I was in some of those things, but I was wrestling a little bit more with some of these like theological issues, and I was kind of trying to disprove Catholicism.
Yeah.
When I was wrestling through this stuff. Whereas I don't feel like you're trying to disprove anything. I feel like what you're trying to do is ask questions. Yeah. And so I want to know, like, what questions do you still have in your mind that you're wrestling through or working through about all this? Or do you feel like you're at a place where you're like, nope, I know what I need to know. I just have to think about it or not think about it?
Yeah, great question. So as far as theological questions remaining, and it's probably a little disappointing because this was one of the questions we talked about almost a year ago, but I feel like the questions remaining are still a little similar. That the issue of the papacy, I think, is one of those things that I don't feel like I've gotten to the bottom of. And when I enter into the conversations, especially between Orthodox and Catholics, because I think there's even more nuance there between Protestants and Catholics.
Sure,
sometimes I think that just gets a little more. We have a lot of years of, fighting where, they do too, but I guess there's more in common, so that the differences are more minute. So it's interesting wading into some of those conversations and trying to figure that out. Like, what was the papacy in the early centuries, and does that somehow mirror what we see at like Vatican I and papal infallibility, things like that. Some questions on the Marian dogmas are still difficult for me, and I feel like I've gotten, what's probably changed since we last talked about this is I understand the arguments better. I've gotten to hear more of the sides, and I've done a lot of reading, but still trying to see, like I can see the arguments, but which is more compelling? And,
right.
Something I've come to is, and maybe this is, too pessimistic. It doesn't feel pessimistic, but I had a conversation with Trent Horn, and he really challenged me, like, what amount of evidence would it take? And we can talk about that a bit later on. But realizing, I think when I went into this at the beginning, it's like, I'm going to get to the very bottom of these questions and have 100% certainty, and like that's going to be that, and I'm going to feel good. And what I'm starting to realize, or at least what I think is happening is, and perhaps it's a little naive, like these debates have been going on for, Orthodox Catholic, like almost 1,000 years now, 500 years for Protestants and Catholics. The idea that I'm going to like solve it in such a a clean way that it seems like there's no debate left is probably a bit overstretching, probably a bit naive that I'd get to that point. So what I'm trying to think of now is like, how do you get to a point of what's more compelling? Because there's brilliant people on all sides of these questions, but whose arguments make a little more sense in light of scripture and tradition and all these things. And what's that marker? And I don't feel like I know the answer to that yet of like, how will I know when like this is enough? But I do think it'll be less of a I have 100% certainty and more of this is more compelling than the others, even if I can understand arguments for the other side.
That is a great point, because here's what I came to understand. If your whole journey is about just information only, you're never going to get anywhere.
Sure.
Because as much information can pull you this way, some can pull you that way. And like you said, there's brilliant people on both sides. And I know, like in my own situation, what made me become ultimately Catholic was, I mean, I had gone through a lot of this stuff for many, many years.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, it was a calling.
Yeah.
You know, it was a relationship with God and with Mary that just grabbed my heart to a point where I just knew in my heart, this is what I was supposed to do. But I spent a lot of years kind of where you are with, all right, I want to get to the bottom of this. I want to get to the bottom of that. I want to learn about this. I want to learn all these arguments. And you finally get to a point where you just throw your hands up and go, is that really what it means to follow Jesus?
Right.
Because I want to ask you this, like, I don't know your total faith journey, but did you have a moment when you became a Christian or before you became a Christian where you were looking at the arguments for Christianity, theism versus atheism or anything like that? Because people do the same thing in that way. You know, did you go through that too? Or how did you become a Christian in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not that many people ask me this question, so happy to answer it. I did grow up in a Christian home. Yeah. And my mom was on staff at a church from about as long as I can remember. I think it was probably when I was about 5 or something that she came on staff at a church. And from a very young age, I was very passionate about my faith. I remember I had one of those like children's Bibles with the pictures.
Oh, the comic book ones.
Yeah, and
those
I ended
awesome.
up like tearing like the covers off of it because like every night like I'd be flipping. Like I just loved it. And I always loved reading. I mean, I've been a bookworm forever. So I loved that for a long time. I wanted to be a missionary. I was super passionate about my faith. I'll try to truncate this story as much as I can. So grew up in the church, was passionate about it, et cetera, et cetera. Got into high school though, and things started to change a bit. I went through a really tough year, about my like sophomore, junior years of high school, where in just like a couple months, my sister, who had been like chronically ill, since she was like middle school, lost her ability to walk like overnight. Her brain couldn't register how to balance. We were on vacation and all this was going on. And then a couple months later, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And then at the same time, like the pastor of our church, like was like, just really went through some things, was being really nasty in a lot of ways. And then was getting really close with this one teacher of mine who was an atheist. And I remember he'd send me these videos of like Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins. Yeah. And at first, like I just kind of like watched, be like whatever. And then I'd watch a little more, and soon I'd be like laughing along with the jokes, and then kind of just going more and realize, slowly kind of just start drifting away from my faith, not even necessarily noticing it that much. I remember a moment I was on a mission trip. I got really passionate about doing that, but at this point had a little bit of bad taste in my mouth for the church. So I actually went on a trip to teach English, but I was like, I don't need the church to do this. I did it through like a secular volunteer organization. I met some like wonderful people. But I remember them asking me that night, like one night, like, are you religious, Austin? And no one had ever asked me that because I was always like,
you were the church kid. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember sitting there and being like, am I? Like, I don't even know how to answer that question. Like I drifted so far, but what ended up bringing me back, I did look into arguments, and I was meeting with a pastor who was like into natural theology, kind of like some Aquinas stuff without necessarily being like a Thomist. And that helped, but ultimately what brought me back, which I think ties in here to make this long story less long, sorry guys, is I was just reading back through the Gospels and just found Jesus utterly compelling. And it's like, yeah, I have these arguments and I think they're good. Not that the mind's unimportant. Just looking at Jesus' life and going like, man, like there's something here that I want. And
Yeah.
like, this is something to give my life to. And I remember at that point, like, I didn't even want to read the rest because like I had just become like so hardened to a lot of it. But when I took like a fresh look at Jesus, it's like, I find Jesus utterly compelling, and the things I've run away from aren't Jesus. And I got like a new passion for the church because it was, I could run away from this and critique it all day, or I could say like, this is like Jesus loves the church. And so I'm going to get into that mess. So that's a bit of the story.
Interesting, because what you didn't say was, I read all these books, I interviewed all these guys,
Yeah.
I, did this incredible search. You had this personal experience with Jesus that, like in your words, was compelling.
Yeah.
And I wonder, where you'll end up with that, because I think there are so many things in that you're kind of stepping into here with different things that are extremely compelling as well, you know, but how will you know when you get there? I guess that's a, what's your goal with all this? What are you trying to do?
Yeah. Well, a couple questions there. How will I know when I get there? I wish I knew. Like I try to ask myself that question. Part of me sometimes thinks, well, but how will I know when I get there? I think what I've been trying to ask myself too, like, again, not that it's all about arguments, but like, it's one thing to say, oh, I can find some loophole, like some flaws in this maybe, but like, if I had to stake a claim to like, which one do I think I could defend better? Like, which one feels more right? Which one, all things considered, I find more compelling? I feel like that's going to be it versus I have 100% certainty. But how do I get there? I think it's a lot of time of honest reflection and looking at these things and just saying like where am I going here? And is this really what I find more compelling? There was a second part of that. How will I know when I get there? What was the other part of that?
Where are you trying to, like, what is your goal?
Oh, what is my goal? Yeah, great question. My goal is to feel less unsure than I feel now. No, my goal, I want to put down roots in a tradition and just feel really solid and kind of live out my life in that, right? Like I do love theology. I love asking these questions. And if I were to convert to Catholicism, Orthodoxy, I think I'd continue having these types of conversations to be a forum for people who are asking these questions, because I really enjoy this and I love theology. But ultimately, I mean, the goal isn't to just forever like be this quasi third party, like looking in and just having these conversations, but to really be able to say like, no, like I feel a conviction that like this is right and living out my life in that. Because I find the position I'm in profoundly like unnatural, right? Like there's something strange about trying to sort through all of these things and, feeling like pulled in different directions, even though it's not like those arguments go away, but eventually I don't want to be asking these same questions forever. Would be the answer there.
You said something a minute ago I wanted to circle back to. What are you unsure of?
Yeah. What am I unsure of?
What do you feel like? Okay, well, let's kind of explore that on both sides of that. What are you absolutely sure of, and what are some things that you're maybe unsure of when it comes to all this stuff?
Yeah. What am I absolutely sure of? I mean, as far as we can be absolutely sure, right? I would say like the conclusions I feel like, I mean, obviously at like the base level, I feel very compelled that God explains our existence better than anything else, right? Like, at theism, and then that Christ is the true revelation of God. I feel very comfortable confessing the Nicene Creed, the Chalcedonian Creed, like that Jesus is fully God, fully man, that the scriptures are the inspired word of God. You kind of keep going on there. Broadly Christian orthodoxy there. What else I feel strongly about? Like the Eucharist, that salvation is being joined to Jesus. Let's see what else. I mean, I feel like there's probably a lot of things I feel certain of, but specifically as far as between traditions, what do I feel sure of? I guess, well, I'll go to what I feel unsure of now. What I feel unsure of is if I'm right about that Protestantism is it's kind of tricky with Protestantism because Protestants aren't necessarily claiming that Christ founded the Protestant church. That'd be a hard claim to kind of take to its logical conclusions, right?
Yeah.
But I think that the claim would be more of that the unity of the church isn't necessarily institutional, right? That like Christ didn't found a church with a visible successor, and even like visible, but I guess that visible church isn't necessarily united by the Bishop of Rome or under more of like an Orthodox view of it. So I feel unsure of that, like whether the Protestant position is the best on that. And then that leads to a whole number of questions, right? And not that I think it's like bad. If I thought it was bad, I wouldn't still be a Protestant. But this journey certainly made me ask questions where I have those uncomfortable moments of like, am I right? Like, I hope. Like, my life would be rather inconvenienced if I'm not right. But I can't say I'm sure of that. What else am I unsure of? A lot of things. Like, arguments between Catholicism and Orthodoxy, and then like we were talking about earlier, like how is Jesus present in the Eucharist, right? Because you have like Luther, Calvin giving one answer, Rome, and then Orthodoxy generally in another way. But they're kind of all trying to get at this idea that we receive Christ in the Eucharist. Unsure of that. Apostolic succession, I guess, would be a big linchpin, right? Because if you accept that, I don't want to be too dismissive here, but like, I don't think the Anglican or Lutheran ways of conceiving of apostolic succession make much sense. So if you accept that, you're kind of left with two options, right? Catholic or Orthodox. So trying to figure that out. A lot of things I'm trying to figure out, but hopefully that's a decent start.
That's interesting. I feel like you can learn as much about issues by recognizing what you are unsure about as you can, but a lot of us want to stay camped out in the areas that we feel sure about.
Yeah,
because
it's a lot more comfortable.
It is. It's more comfortable, and we're just like, okay, I know this, I know that, and we can live there. Mm-hmm. But I think that when we are willing to come face to face with the things that we're not sure about, that gives us space to grow and to learn. But what's challenging about that is to sometimes make that transition from, okay, I wasn't sure about this before, but now I am. Yeah. Like maybe there's issues that you've looked into that when you first started this, you would have thought, I would never believe anything like this about the Catholic Church. And now you're kind of, well, okay. I kind of call those aha moments with that. Have you had any of those?
Those aha moments?
Yeah.
Like in a positive way, like, so now I'm sure about this?
Well, kind of like maybe there was something about Catholicism you didn't understand. And maybe thought it was, goofy or whatever. And then now you're like, oh, yeah, now I understand that, or I can appreciate that.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think the very first thing, which was pivotal looking back, was that there are passionate Catholics. As silly as I always feel saying that.
I know exactly what you mean.
Growing up, I had never come across any passionate Catholics, despite the fact that I lived in Maryland, literally named after the Virgin Mary. So yeah, I hadn't run across any. And I think for me, like that really opened the door to even like thinking these were questions worth asking, right? Because if it's just a dead faith, like it doesn't really matter, right? And so that was a big one of seeing that. I think a lot of the aha moments are, I went into it maybe at the very beginning thinking, like, yeah, Catholics are wrong about these things, but they're just kind of like misguided, because they don't read the Bible, right?
Right.
Like, oh, actually they do, and actually they, have a long history of answering these questions. So realizing like, oh, wow, there's good answers here on the other side. That was just an aha moment in of itself. Like, wow, I had never come across, passionate Catholics or really informed Catholics. The only Catholics I knew were kind of cultural Catholics. And so both of those things are what really opened the door to asking these questions and diving deeper, because, if they are passionate, so like there is a life of faith there, and there is a theological life there. Mm-hmm. There's these good answers. Well, then I need to reckon with these answers, because their answers are in contradictions to the answers that I'm giving on these similar questions that I would have just taken for granted. So I never would have thought to ask questions about the Eucharist or even really the nature of the church. Like, yeah, of course, like the church, like, wherever Christ is being worshipped in a way that accords with the Bible, like, there you go. There's the church. But now realizing there's people giving very different answers to that question.
Yeah.
So that would be an aha, I think.
Tell us about where you are with the Mary stuff.
The Mary
Since you
stuff.
said, you talked about Maryland,
Mary?
and I know a lot of people,
Yeah.
and guys, we're going to take questions from you guys in the chat here in just a minute. So if you have questions, fire them up, and just get ready, and then we'll go through some of those. But for a lot of Protestants, there can be some pretty significant hangups with regard to Catholicism and Orthodoxy, and their views on the Virgin Mary.
Yeah.
Where are you at with that?
Yeah, it's a tough one. So again, I think one big thing is I've learned the arguments at least. So
Okay.
I think, and part of, I think, just as like a tip for people trying to learn to even just engage in these dialogues, even if you're not trying to engage in such a way that you might change your opinion, is learn to express the other side's views well enough that you could say, like, yeah, that they could respond, yes, that's what we believe. Because I think often we caricaturize one another, like,
Sure.
oh, you guys worship Mary, and you have no idea about like the dulia latria distinction or whatever. So learn those things, and I've been able to learn those things and see, okay, here's where these dogmas come from. I saw you had William and Father Cappas on. I had them on, so read their book, things like that, saying, oh, okay, like here's where in like the patristic resources, but also like here, that's foreign to me. I didn't grow up with a lot of typology or anything, but seeing, the relationship between Jephthah's daughter and Mary, these different things, saying, okay, I understand where these come from. Where I'm at with them, I guess I would say, like, one, yeah, I understand the arguments better. There's some things, like, I would say I've probably changed my mind on, at least become a lot more warm to the idea of the perpetual virginity of Mary. I don't, and this might get me in trouble, I don't know. I don't think that really has that much significance. Like, I feel like that's something I can accept without much change, right? Like, Mary was perpetually virgin. Okay. Yeah. Whether I sign off on that or not doesn't really seem to change my life a lot. Maybe I'm not understanding it fully. But when I look like at Calvin essentially saying the same thing I did, like, I can't say it didn't happen. I can't prove it from scripture. Luther saying, yes, like she was perpetually virgin. To me, and then you look through the history of, even if I might struggle to see that in scripture in some places, of all the church fathers, people will comment, there's some, okay. But the vast majority saying that, to me, there's a certain like theological humility in saying, okay, like they all signed off on this idea and it seems to have, good backing. I can see that. The other, I'd say one thing I struggle with, again, I don't actually see this having that much consequence, but we actually have it pictured behind us, the Ascension,
the Assumption.
the bodily Assumption of Mary. To me, and I feel kind of bad because I feel like Protestants pick on this idea a lot.
Yeah.
And so I actually don't think it's like that significant one way or the other. And I can see the arguments for it. But that's one I'm like, I struggle to see that in scripture. But, I get Revelation 12 and, well, they would have been pretty obsessed with like her remains and that we have no one talking about.
Yeah, we just looked at a bunch of relics in here,
Right.
Yeah, I remember that blew my mind when I was thinking, learning about the Assumption and going, okay, all these Catholics are into all these relics. Why are there no relics, bodily relics of the Virgin Mary,
Right. So like I get that.
Yeah.
I'd say, honestly, then I think you could accept all four. Yeah, I think there's four Marian dogmas. And then there's that, none of them specifically to me talk to intercession, which is kind of like a separate issue with the intercession of the saints. I also get like that goes back. It's not something I've necessarily felt comfortable with, saying like, yeah, I feel like this is signed off on in scripture. Now, I also don't go around saying like, the pagans for praying to saints or I don't think that's the case by any means. But I guess one of my struggles with Marian devotion would be, sometimes I feel like there's a gap, and I think Catholics could recognize this too. And I wonder if this is what the Reformation was getting at more so in some instances of, okay, you can say one thing about Mary, but this way of devotion to Mary seems to be pointing to an even higher level. Like you can have on paper that like latria dulia distinction,
Right.
but if I didn't have that distinction, or sometimes it's unclear how meaningful that is, I guess. Like if I was to come up with like what would it look like to worship Mary, and then I looked at some instances of devotion, to me it might be hard to distinguish those. Though I do get I think you could respond if I was Catholic, probably the distinction, there's no sacrifice here, and like ancient worship would have always involved sacrifice, like you have the sacrifice of the Mass and the Eucharist. Okay. But I guess, yeah, just the devotional practices sometimes seem to go in a direction that seems uncomfortable, or like you might feel uncomfortable asking Jesus, so ask Mary. To me, that seems to maybe have some practical implications that could be suboptimal.
Sure,
I guess.
sure.
That's a long answer to your question.
Well,
hopefully that was helpful.
No, it was helpful. I think, and you made a statement a minute ago about struggling to find intercession in the scripture. Mm-hmm. And I remember going through all that kind of stuff too. And I'll tell you where I found it. Okay. It was in the understanding and the type, and you keyed on the typology. Mm-hmm. It was in the understanding of Mary as Queen Mother. Okay. So that's a typology, because in the Old Covenant, we have a Queen Mother who was an intercessor. That was her job. Okay. Her function as Queen Mother was not to rule in and of herself. It was to be an intercessor for the subjects to the king. Yeah. So when people recognize her queenship as the Queen Mother, as the fulfillment of that typology, that is kind of, at least that's where I recognize that as coming from in the scripture. There are probably other people that would in that, because to me, the communion of the saints, the intercession of the saints, when we look at Hebrews, where it says we're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, to me, the writer of Hebrews is showing us this beautiful image of what is real. Yeah. And we're always told to pray for one another. And this idea of the saints, of course, in Revelation, praying in heaven, and so they're praying for us in heaven. So I think it's a lot of like, some people say, oh, well, you're jumping to conclusions, but I think it's really not that hard. But if you start with the place that says, I cannot accept this, then unless things are hard, explicitly taught, you won't. But it's what's interesting, and I was guilty of this. I had a lot of things in my life that looked like, if you were to say the latria dulia distinction, I think a lot of Protestants have that with the Bible. Yeah. I think that's where people hold up they almost worship the Bible as though it is divine. Yeah. And some Protestants would hear that and go, well, it is, it's the word of God, but the Bible is not God. Yeah. Right. So, but there can be sometimes this glorification and worship of the Bible in some of those things. And I'm not saying anybody's doing that. I'm just saying, like, there are different ways that we can feel that tension you're talking about. But I appreciate what you're saying with regard to Mary, because I think the fact is there are some people that don't have a healthy understanding of that. Some Catholics, some Orthodox maybe. Yeah. And they don't understand, but that's why I find the catechism to be so helpful, is to say, look, when human experience gets sideways, which it invariably will, right? We have to have a place where we can go to definitively find answers. Yeah. And that to me has been so helpful, to have this magisterial teaching and the catechism, the deposit of faith, so that when you're like, man, I don't know, this doesn't look right. Are these guys doing this? Is a little bit, what grounds us in that? And when, in Protestantism, at least for me, when I had to be grounded by my own understanding of scripture, and I realized that was a lot of times shaky. Yeah. It was tough, but I appreciate what you're saying. And I appreciate you sharing that with us. Are you cool to take some questions? Oh,
I'd love to.
Okay.
I don't promise great answers, but I'll
by the way, I've got my laptop here. You see me looking down, or I had some questions for Austin on my phone. I wasn't like, checking my Facebook or anything like that. I was trying to make sure I didn't miss something important I wanted to say, but kind of the most important thing I want to do right now is answer some of your questions.
Let's do it.
So, I haven't seen anything that you guys have said before this, really. So I hope you've been nice. But we got a question here right now from Dustin Neely. He says, where are you on? Is he one of your guys?
He is. He's
awesome.
Orthodox.
All right. Hey, Dustin, how you doing, man? Welcome to my channel. Where are you on penal substitutionary atonement? Is that something you are struggling with?
Interesting question, Dustin.
Very interesting question.
Yeah, so penal substitutionary atonement, it's probably the most
I should leave this up here while you're talking about it.
View of the atonement in evangelical circles, especially probably more Reformed circles. My view on it, so I would want to hold together that there is like a substitutionary element to Christ's death, right? That he died a death that we couldn't die in our place. But I would also want to kind of, with that at the same time, talk about participation, that we have both of these motifs in scriptures. Not only does Christ die on our behalf, but through being united to Christ, we die with him. Like in Romans 6, you have this idea of like you've been baptized into Christ's death. So I think in atonement theory, it's important to kind of hold together substitution and participation. Is it something I'm struggling with? Not really. That's something. Union with Christ is kind of like a theological topic that I've done some writing on and am interested in. So that's probably something I could list under like, yeah, I feel good about this. It's not something I worry about a whole lot.
Okay. That's a long question. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can go with that. But I mean, I remember like when I became a Catholic and I learned that wasn't part of Catholicism, this penal substitutionary atonement. I was like, what? I thought that was the gospel. Yeah. And then I kind of was like taken in a different direction with the church of like, no, this is, it's bigger than that. It's not just God is mad at someone, so he has to take his anger out on someone. Oh, there's Jesus, bang. Yeah. Now we're good. There's it's deeper level than that. Yeah, and I think it can lead to really unhealthy places, especially the penal side of that. So when I was affirming the substitutionary side, I was intentionally leaving penal to the side because while it can be like said with nuance, I think often mad to like throw Jesus in front of a bus. I don't know. Well, a lot of our church camp kind of metaphors aren't awesome. You know what I mean? Yeah, and I'm not sure they always do justice to like what theologians are trying to get at. Good question. Good question, Dustin. Thank you for being here. Okay, here's a good one. Mike Sontowski says, Austin, have you ever checked out the Eucharistic miracles of the Catholic Church? It's interesting. This is one of the most common questions I get. And so maybe I'll have to like do a video on this one day. So that I don't have more no, these questions are great. The answer would be like yes and no. So I've done a little bit of looking. I remember watching one of Matt Fradd's videos on Eucharistic miracles where they kind of went through some of them. Yeah. And I thought it was interesting. I can't say I've like looked into it a lot. I've read a bit about the story of, I guess he's blessed now, Carlo Acutis, and his story because a bunch of people were passing him along. And it's really interesting. It's tough for me. I feel like naturally I'm a bit of a skeptic. And so sometimes when I hear some of these stories, I'm like, what? Come on. Yeah. But they're interesting. I really should look into it more. It's one of those things, there's so many different things to look into and try to prioritize them in some way to make sense of them. But if people have recommendations for where to start with that, I'd be open to it. Oh, yeah. Well, there's a lot of research. I will get back to you on that. Okay. Yeah. Because let me know. There's a lot of incredible. And I think that there was a movie that just came out a couple years ago. I remember watching an episode of the Catholic Talk Show. They were talking to the guy who made the movie about the Eucharistic miracles. And they're incredible. I mean, there's some in France, there's some in Italy, Brazil. I mean, and even in the United States. Wow. There's a lot going on with that stuff. Okay. This is kind of a big question too. Maybe you can help us out here. Member of Homo Sapiens says, what doctrines intrigues you the most about Catholicism or Orthodoxy? Is there any one thing that you're just like, man, that is like super interesting to think about? Super interesting to think about. That's a really intriguing way of asking that question. I would say the things that interest me most, like ecclesiology in general. So the nature of the church. Yeah, the nature of the church. Yeah, sorry. Specifically like the papacy, right? Because I've heard people talk about like the papacy is the stumbling block and the cornerstone. Because it's one of those things that while I struggle with necessarily coming to a conclusion on, if it is true, I think that's profoundly good news, right? Like if there is a vicar of Christ on earth who is a successor to Peter and holds the keys of the kingdom, like that's a good thing if true, right? If not true, then well, it's not a good thing. But I think it's one of those things like, okay, this is one of those ideas that is so impactful
that it's worth more attention. For instance, like if I have to sit down, in addition to like my theology major, I'm going to read a book on the side. It's probably not going to be about Eucharistic miracles, great as they are, but I'd probably pick the book on the papacy if I had to like prioritize the two. That's kind of more towards the top of my list. The Eucharist is something that's been really important to me in researching. I'd say those things in general. Like the Magisterium I find interesting. One of my favorite books I've read on Catholicism would be The Meaning of Tradition by Yves Congar. And I think he just talks really eloquently about tradition. And I found that really interesting. I wrote a paper on the church as a sacrament this semester. So the sacraments generally and ecclesiology, those things kind of coming together. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Okay. Yeah. I think the papacy, if that's true, that's kind of like,
then you have to become Catholic.
Yeah, exactly. And if it's not true, there's no reason to be Catholic.
Right.
I mean, okay. Here's a kind of practical question.
Okay.
From Sherry. She's in the Rosary Cruise. She says, Austin, have you ever prayed the Rosary?
Not really. Like I've heard the words enough that I can like say the words through my head, I guess. And I've like gone but I wouldn't say that it's been like a real prayer, if that makes sense. Like,
sure. No, I understand.
Say it, I guess.
Okay. That's good. Okay. Let's keep going here. Okay. Here's a question. I'm going to stick to questions just for Austin. For me, some of you guys, okay. I think Isabel's trying to ask you, will you go to a pilgrim? Have you ever been on a pilgrimage?
I have not. I'd be super open to it though.
Okay. That would be huge. That would be huge. Okay. Let's keep going here. I am looking for some more stuff here.
Thanks everyone for being here, by the way, and asking questions. I see there's 200 people watching.
Yeah, this is awesome. Okay, Brian Farley says, you mentioned in one of your previous videos that you're a Protestant by conviction. Can you explain what that means, please?
Yeah, so it was that I mentioned that. But I'm guessing what I was getting at is I find Protestant explanations of certain things more compelling than I find others. So, and I guess what I'd say, like the main thing on that would probably be justification. Like as far as if I look at like what are the things that hold me to Protestantism? I mean, I'd say one, like the passion that I find among evangelicals. But doctrinally, I'd probably say justification is one of the bigger things, which of course was at the heart of the Reformation. So it kind of makes sense for that to be. Yeah, I don't know. Depends on the tone in which I said that.
Do you remember that video?
I don't know when I said it. That probably sounds more confident than I sounded today. And maybe that's like a result of a progression. But I mean, I guess what I was probably trying to get at is it's not just like default Protestantism. Though if I'm being fair, like there is an element of like, I grew up Protestant. So it's not like this is a...
You don't have to like study Protestant positions because you already have them by default.
Yeah. So I might have been overstating the case. I don't know.
Oh, I got you. Okay. Well, speaking of studying, Melody, I hope I said your name right. I'm sorry if I didn't. Have you read Upon This Rock, Steve Ray, Scott Hahn's Lamb's Supper, Fourth Cup? Like what apologetics books have you read? And I bet there's probably a lot.
There are a decent number. Actually, not that many on that list, though. So I haven't read Upon This Rock. And part of that is people have been so generous in sending me books.
Yeah.
And so I try to prioritize those books. And I'm also just kind of cheap. So,
you're a college student.
Yeah. So no one sent me Upon This Rock, so I haven't read Upon This Rock. So that's why I haven't read that. But it sounds great, and I've listened to talks by him. I don't have the Lamb's Supper. I do have the Fourth Cup. I've kind of skimmed the Fourth Cup. So that answers that. As far as other apologetic books, specifically by Scott Hahn, I've read Rome Sweet Home. I've read Brant Petree's books on the Eucharist and on Mary. I've read Joe Heschmeyer's book on the papacy. I've read Rod Bennett's book, The Four Witnesses. Other apologetics books. For Orthodox, I've read like the Orthodox Way, and a couple other Orthodox books. I'm trying to think. Father Josiah Trenum's book, Rock and Sand. There's probably more. I also tried to like read the sources more, like the fathers and whatnot. And then within Catholicism, like I don't know if I'd call it an apologetic book, but like Yves Congar I mentioned. Read Avery Cardinal Dulles, a couple of his works, other like ressourcement theologians. actually Avery Cardinal Dulles, A Testimonial to Grace. It was like Rome Sweet Home before Rome Sweet Home.
Okay.
Like back in the 40s. But yeah, a lot of books like that. Some of those overlap with my studies too.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, a couple more, you guys. Tan Dang at Tilapia.
These are such fun usernames.
They are. You guys are awesome. What particular things do you think the Catholics should learn from Protestants and vice versa? Or the two things that the two milieux should share with each other? Thanks.
Yeah, great question. This is something we talked about in our first
I remember
video.
this, yeah.
Yeah, I think I actually made like a clip of this. So things that Catholics could learn from Protestants, I think, and vice versa.
And vice versa, yeah.
Catholics from Protestants, I think just kind of like the dynamism, especially within evangelicalism, right?
Sure.
Protestantism is like a big tent. Catholicism is too, to be fair. But I think the passion that you see, like for evangelism specifically, at like a lay level and like mission work, for non-clerics, like something that's really inspiring to me at Moody. Moody has a long history of mission work. We actually have a wall where it's like all TVs and it's all touchscreen. There's dots all over the world, and you can click on them and see where Moody students have gone, and like Moody martyrs as well, like people who have died for the faith, spreading it all throughout the world. So like when I see something like that, I'm like, wow, this is a beautiful thing. Not that doesn't. I mean, Catholic Church has done a lot in missions, but it's a different approach. I think that's something. It's interesting. One thing we talked about that I think is pretty big is Protestants, I think, do a really good job of it, generally speaking, like in the churches I grew up, where we're like more megachurch style, of thinking through the lens of someone coming in for the first time.
Yes.
So you're coming in and they're thinking, how can I get you information that you need, help like make this experience easy, help make you feel comfortable, and then help get you involved in things like what are a group you can join, how are ways that you can serve. The Catholic Church, I mean, some by nature of the service, right? It's different than Mass. It's less focused on the people in that way. But I do think sometimes there's missed opportunities of, you walk into a church, and I've been lucky because people see my videos and then they want to explain everything to me, which is really
That's
nice.
really lucky.
Yeah, but like, I think a lot of like you walk in, no one explains anything to you, you sit through it, you have no idea what happened. Like, and then you walk out and, nothing happened there. Whereas that definitely could happen, but I think maybe it's a little less likely to happen in a Protestant church. So I think that's probably a big one. And the passion for like personal study of Scripture. Protestants, a lot of like biblical scholarship that Protestants have done. But let's talk about the reverse, because I don't want to be unfair there. So things Protestants could learn from Catholics, the beauty of tradition, the value of architecture as we sit in this beautiful space.
Yeah.
Father Joshua and I were talking this morning about it's not neutral how we build our churches. So when we decide to make a church look like, say, a Swedish minimalist coffee shop, that is saying something theologically.
Swedish minimalist coffee shop.
Yeah, that's just the language we used earlier today. What a fun conversation. But yeah, so I think that's one. Reverence.
Okay, yeah.
I think Protestants and Catholics probably, like, there is this dynamic of God's immanence and God's transcendence, that God, like, did come into space and time in the incarnation and is present to us. There's that sense of, like, and the accessibility of God. I think Protestants highlight that, whereas often in the Catholic Church, you have more of this respect for, like, the awe and wonder and majesty of God. I think we need both, and I think Protestants sometimes can maybe be a little too casual with that. There's probably a lot more things, but
that's good stuff. Okay, this is a very important question.
Very important question. Let's see it.
From DD here.
DD.
What does your fiance think of all this stuff?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that.
Yeah.
So we just did a video together. Can
I saw that.
An unsubtle plug for that, because her videos are far more exciting than my videos. So yeah, you can definitely watch that if you want to see it, but I'm not going to just end it there. So what does she think of all this? One of the things I'm most grateful for is that she started asking these questions from watching my videos, because this can be, I mean, I'm sure you can talk to this, but asking these questions, not only can they be unsettling, and sometimes it feels exciting, but sometimes it feels lonely. Like I'm asking all these questions and I feel unsure and I'm not sure what to do. And you realize this is going to affect more than you. This has, you were a pastor, this is going to affect a lot of things. I'm, studying to get a Protestant theology degree, right? So at first I was like, I have no idea what she'll think of all this, but I felt these are questions I need to keep asking. And so I probably could have done a better job at the beginning of pulling her into it, but slowly kind of let her start asking questions from watching my videos. And just, a couple of weeks ago, she's like, I've been really thinking about these conversations we've been having about bishops. I want to study that this summer. I'm like, sweet, we'll do it. And just asking other questions about Catholicism. I just brought her to a mass. That's the video I was referencing. But I'd say she's interested in these things. probably through my interest. She's very smart in her own way, but probably less theologically inclined than I am, right? Like, this is what I'm studying. She's a business major. She's into different things. But she has gotten interested in it and wants to ask these questions as well. So, yeah.
So she's now like, Austin, what are you doing, man? This is nuts. Stop going there.
No, yeah, that hasn't been her reaction.
Okay. I kind of didn't think so after I saw her video.
At first, though, I will say, I think, we had a conversation where she was like, this is kind of weird. Like,
it is kind of weird. Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I wish I knew what I was doing. I don't know. But yeah, I think, not saying like, she's beating down the doors of Catholic churches to come in and like convert or something, but she's intrigued and she wants to ask these questions.
And this is something that the two of you can talk about together and walk through this.
Yeah.
Because I guarantee you she's going to have questions that you've already worked through.
Right.
And she might have some different ones.
Yeah, she might figure these questions out.
She might go, duh, Austin.
Yeah, what she said. Like, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful for that. That makes it all feel a lot lighter and kind of more, it goes through journeys. Like, sometimes this is exciting and I'll have other times where I'm like, why did I ask these questions? Like, why did I start? But when she said, like, I want to start asking these questions, it kind of got more exciting again. It's like, okay, like, this isn't something I feel like I'm doing like in opposition to you or that's going to cause.
You don't have to hide it. You don't have to be like, because I remember when I was first going through this, I was scared to tell my wife what was going on. I was like, she's going to freak out. I have 3 little kids and she used to be Catholic and I took her away from that church and now we're a pastor's family. And if she knew that I was thinking about this, she'd be terrified.
Yeah.
So, I didn't say anything. And then, it was kind of a disaster. But then coming through this again years later, it was a different story. It was more like what you're doing now. Yeah. So, you're way ahead of where I was and it's been awesome. Well, I'm really happy to hear that. And, I know that she's going to have some awesome experiences going through this stuff too. Okay, guys, we got just time for a couple more. We have to be respectful of the time here. Oh, this is a good question. Do you have any favorite saints?
Any favorite saints? I've started going through the work of Saint Bonaventure.
Oh, yeah. Because he's a smart dude.
Yeah, he was a smart dude. I'm interested in doing like grad school in either early Christian or medieval studies, and I'm working on like a writing sample for a medieval studies program, and I think I'm going to write it on the soul's journey into God. But I just really enjoy his approach. He's like a warmer Thomas Aquinas. He's brilliant, but very dry. Whereas like Boniface, he writes with such warmth and more Franciscan.
Okay, here's a very important question. Austin, my dude, Andrew Mooney. Not on topic, just curious. Who won the "We're Getting Married in My Church" debate?
Who won the "We're Getting Married in My Church" debate?
I'm guessing that's between you and Eliza.
There hasn't really been that debate, so I guess we both win.
Okay, then maybe I'm lacking context.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, there hasn't really been.
Jesus is going to win that debate.
Yeah.
All right, here's another one. Immaculate Heart says, have you explored the Fatima miracle of the sun? And what are your thoughts about other apparitions such as Lourdes, etc.?
The short answer would be I haven't really. I saw that there was a movie on it and I thought I should watch it, but then I saw it was like $20 to download, so I didn't. But I heard about it and
Boy, I would love to talk with you about that sometime after you've, had an opportunity to look into Fatima. When I remember learning that stuff, just going, this is insane. Like, this is like, why didn't we ever hear about this stuff? And I don't know if maybe you've had that kind of revelation in your thoughts where you've learned something about Catholicism and you thought, why didn't anybody tell me about this? This is super cool. Yeah. When you learn about some of this stuff, like just talk to somebody about Fatima and make that a show. It'll be incredible. Okay, a couple more, you guys, real quick here. All right. Okay. There's a lot of questions in here I think would be kind of more like episodial questions than questions that I think could be like easy to jump down here. So, okay, we already talked about the rosary. Man, there's a lot of people in here. Okay. A lot of you guys are having your own conversations, and that's all cool.
Lovely.
All right. Well, I think we should probably, put a pin in this for now. And when you come through Cedar Rapids, we'll sit down. All right. And we'll do this.
Let's do it.
And we'll do it in my living room. It'll look kind of something not like this, but
this isn't what your living room looks like.
We're getting there.
Not yet.
We're working on it. But Austin, let me just again tell you, I appreciate you and your, the journey that you're on is it's an exciting one. I know the good and the bad of it.
Yeah.
And I know that there are times where it feels frustrating and it feels like it's never ending. And you just kind of pull your hair and go, what is the deal here, God? What are you doing? And my prayer for you is that you're going to come into a place where this becomes less about knowledge and more about a calling to where God wants you to be. Because I know that when you get that in your heart, then it's like, then the lights go on and you go, okay, wow. Because I think it's St. Paul that said, knowledge puffs up.
Yeah.
But faith builds up. And I think that there comes a point when, prophecies will cease, all these things, but there's something that goes beyond this stuff, this relational aspect to our faith that is bigger than we can understand. And I feel like God is ready to just knock you over with some incredible stuff here soon. And I know a lot of us, we can't wait to see it. Now, I say that not as a guy with an agenda, not as a guy that's like, well, if you don't do what I want you to do, then, I'm going to unsub to your channel, not going to happen. But I just know that you are in for some incredible times ahead of you as you continue to push in this. Because what I believe about this stuff is this. If you dare God to reveal truth to you and show you what he wants for you, and you really honestly mean that, he's going to lead you and guide you where he wants you. And the thing about it is you have to have the guts to step into it knowing that it's going to cost you, knowing that you're going to lose some things. And you've probably experienced some of that already, but whatever he has in store for you on the other side of that, man, it's more amazing than you could ever imagine. And that's my biggest prayer for you, brother.
I really appreciate that. Awesome.
Austin, thank you so much. It's great to shake your hand and not just like, say hi to a screen or bye to a screen and press a button and then you disappear, Yeah. So, man, guys, thank you all so much for being here. There's so many of you in the chat. And I want you guys to know this has been a blast. And man, we've just had a great time. This time has flown by. And I want to thank all of you guys for taking time to be here, for watching Catholic Feedback. It's my honor that you guys take time to explore these eternal truths of the Catholic faith and connect them to our everyday life. So welcome. You're welcome. For those of you that are here, thank you for your comments. Thank you for your participation. And until we meet again next time, friends. By the way, next week is going to be awesome. I got Mr. Trent Horn is going to be coming on the podcast. We're talking about the question of, is the Catholic Church just a bunch of recycled paganism, which is a charge that gets leveled at us all the time. Here, it's going to be great. That'll be next week at 11 a.m. Central. If you are praying the rosary with us here today, we're going to be doing that at 4:30 Central. I thought it was 4:45, but it's 4:30. We're going to be doing it right here in St. John Cantius. And so I encourage all of you guys to tune back in and pray with us. Austin, thanks so much once again for being here. God bless all of you. Thanks for listening to Catholic Feedback with Keith Nestor. Send in your questions and comments to feedback@catholicfeedback.com. This podcast is brought to you by Stewardship, a mission of faith, and is also supported by our team at patreon.com/Keith Nestor. Please consider joining our support team. Catholic Feedback is a production of Down to Earth Ministries. For more information about Down to Earth or to bring me to your parish or event, visit down2earthministry.org. See you next time.